I would rather chew glass than touch that cow. Those 8 words hit me harder than any fist I had ever taken in my 68 years of life. I stood inside the handicap stall of the marble-tiled bathroom at the Ritz-Carlton, my hand gripping the stainless steel railing so hard my knuckles turned white. My other hand was clenched into a fist ready to batter down the door. I knew that voice. It was the smooth, polished baritone of Bradley Pierce, the man who in less than 2 hours was scheduled to cut a 3-tier cake with my only daughter, Sarah. I stopped breathing. The air in the bathroom felt suddenly thin, suffocating, smelling of expensive cologne and betrayal. But look at her father's bank account. Another voice laughed. It was Chad Bradley's best man and college roommate. If you can hold your breath for 2 years, you will never have to work a day in your life again. Just think of the inheritance, Brad. The old man looks like he has 1 foot in the grave already. I heard the sound of a zipper, then the splash of water against the urinal. I closed my eyes, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I am Clint Sullivan. I built a logistics empire from a single second-hand delivery truck. I have negotiated with union bosses who wanted to break my legs and corporate sharks who wanted to strip my company for parts. I learned a long time ago that you do not strike when you are angry. You strike when you are ready. You are a genius, Brad. Chad continued, his voice echoing off the tiles. But seriously, how do you do it? She is so clingy. And let's be honest, she takes up half the bed. I close my eyes and think of the money. Bradley's laugh was a cold, sharp sound that made my stomach turn. I just tell her she is beautiful and she melts. She is so desperate for love she would believe me if I told her the sky was green. Once we are married, I will pay off my gambling debts with the wedding cash, and then I can keep my side piece happy. Sarah never has to know. Gambling debts. Side piece. The words burned into my brain. My daughter was not a bride to him. She was a transaction, a lifeline for a drowning man. I looked at my reflection in the polished metal of the toilet paper dispenser. I saw an old man in a tuxedo, yes. But beneath that I saw the truck driver who used to sleep in laybys with a tire iron under his seat. They thought I was a fragile old man with a fading mind. They thought I was the prey. They were about to find out that they had just locked themselves in a cage with a very patient predator. Before I continue this story of how I dismantled a con artist piece by piece, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be exactly right. I waited until I heard the water running in the sinks. I took a deep breath, released my death grip on the railing, and unlocked the stall door. I stepped out. The silence that fell over the bathroom was instant. Bradley and Chad froze. Bradley's hands were covered in soap foam, his face draining of all color in a single second. He looked at me through the mirror, his eyes wide with panic. He knew. He knew I had been in the stall. He knew I must have heard everything. Mr. Sullivan, Bradley stammered, spinning around water dripping from his hands onto his shiny dress shoes. We didn't know you were in here. I stopped at the sink next to him. I looked him dead in the eye. This was the moment. I could end it right here. I could smash his face into the porcelain sink. I could drag him out to the ballroom and expose him to everyone. But that would be messy. Sarah would cry. She would defend him. She would say I was being controlling, that I misunderstood. She was in love, and love makes smart people blind. I needed more than violence. I needed total destruction. I reached up to my right ear and tapped the small beige device sitting there. It was a high-end hearing aid, one that cost $5,000 and worked perfectly. But right now it was my greatest weapon. I pulled it out and shook it violently, frowning like a confused pensioner. Damn piece of junk, I grumbled, my voice loud and slightly slurred. The battery died 20 minutes ago. I have been walking around in silence all night. I put the device back in my ear and looked at Bradley with a vacant, innocent smile. Did you say something, son? The music out there is too loud for my old ears. I came in here for some peace and quiet. The relief that washed over Bradley's face was insulting. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. He let out a breath he had been holding for 10 seconds. He exchanged a quick, smirking glance with Chad. "The old fool is deaf," their eyes said. "We are safe." "Oh, nothing," Dad Bradley said, his voice regaining its oily confidence. He even patted my shoulder with a wet hand. "We were just saying how beautiful the party is, and how lucky I am to be marrying Sarah." I forced myself not to flinch at his touch. I smiled, the picture of the doting, oblivious father. "You are a good boy, Brad. Sarah is lucky to have you. I just want my little girl to be happy. That is all I have ever wanted." "Of course," Dad Bradley said, drying his hands. "We should get back out there. The speeches are starting soon." "You go ahead," I said, turning the tap on. "I need to wash up." They left the bathroom laughing as soon as the heavy door swung shut. I stood there watching the water swirl down the drain. I washed my hands, scrubbing them as if I could wash away the filth of their presence. I was not losing my hearing. In fact, I had heard enough to sentence Bradley Pierce to a lifetime of regret. I dried my hands, straightened my tie, and looked in the mirror one last time. The grandfather was gone. The CEO was back. I walked back into the ballroom. It was a sea of crystal chandeliers, white roses, and people who pretended to like each other. In the center of it all was Sarah. She was sitting at the head table looking down at her engagement ring. She was 32, a brilliant accountant who could spot a tax error from a mile away, but who couldn't see that the man holding her hand was a parasite. She looked up and saw me approaching. Her face lit up, but I saw the shadow behind her eyes. She adjusted her dress, pulling the fabric away from her waist. She was self-conscious. I knew Bradley had been making subtle comments about her weight for months. "Just helpful advice for the wedding photos," he would say. I had stayed out of it because I wanted her to be independent. I realized now that my silence had been a mistake. I sat down next to her. Bradley was on her other side, whispering something in her ear that made her smile, a desperate, eager smile that broke my heart. He was playing the part of Prince Charming perfectly. He poured her water, he fixed a stray lock of her hair. He looked at her with an adoration that I now knew was as fake as a $3 bill. Clint Bradley's mother, Karen, leaned across the table. Her voice was shrill and demanding. "This venue is simply spectacular. Although I must say the service is a bit slow. We have been waiting for the champagne refill for 5 minutes. "I will take care of it," I said quietly. Bradley leaned in, bypassing Sarah, to talk to me. His greed was so palpable I could almost smell it. "Dad, speaking of taking care of things, I wanted to ask you something. I know this isn't the time, but Sarah and I were looking at that property in the hills again. The agent says if we don't put down the deposit by Monday, we lose it." He was doing it. He was asking for money in the middle of his own engagement party. He knew I wouldn't cause a scene in front of the guests. He was banking on my love for Sarah to open my wallet. Sarah looked down at her plate. "Dad, we can wait. We don't need a mansion right away." "Nonsense, baby," Bradley said, squeezing her hand a little too hard. "Your father wants us to have the best start possible." "Right, Dad." I looked at him. I saw the debt he was hiding. I saw the side piece he was funding. I saw the contempt he held for my daughter. And I smiled. "Absolutely," I said. I pulled out my checkbook from my inside pocket. Bradley's eyes widened. He practically salivated. "I want you two to be secure." "How much was the deposit again?" $50,000, Bradley said quickly. Too quickly. I wrote the check. My hand was steady. I signed my name with a flourish. I tore it out and handed it to him. He took it, his fingers trembling slightly. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't say thank you to her. He just stared at the numbers. You are generous to a fault, Clint, Karen said, eyeing the check in her son's hand. It is an investment, I said, looking directly at Bradley. I believe in getting what you pay for. The rest of the night was a blur of toasts and forced laughter. I watched Bradley parade Sarah around the room like a trophy he had won at a county fair. He was charming to the guests, deferential to me, and seemingly affectionate to Sarah. But every time he thought a woman was looking, his smile dropped. I saw him checking his phone constantly. I saw him wink at Chad across the room. I saw the way he looked at the young catering staff with hungry eyes. I sat there sipping my iced tea, letting the anger crystallize into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I was not just going to stop this wedding. I was going to dismantle Bradley Pierce's life. I was going to strip him of his reputation, his freedom, and his future. When the party finally wound down and the guests began to leave, Sarah came over to hug me. She smelled like vanilla and hope. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. "Today was perfect. He is perfect." I held her tighter than usual. "I am glad you are happy, sweetheart," I lied. "Go home, get some rest," I told them. "You have a big future ahead of you." I watched them drive away in the convertible I had leased for them. Bradley was driving. He didn't even open the door for her. As soon as their taillights disappeared around the corner, my posture changed. The slouch of the tired old man vanished. I walked to my own car, a black sedan that I kept meticulously clean. I sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the night wrapping around me. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I pulled out my phone. It was 11:45 p.m. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Leonard Vargas. Leonard was not a cheap lawyer. He was not a nice lawyer. He was the kind of man you called when you needed a problem to cease existing. He was a former forensic accountant turned private investigator turned attorney. He knew where the bodies were buried because he usually held the shovel. He answered on the second ring. "Clint, it's late. Is everything okay?" "No." "Leo," I said, my voice flat and hard. "Nothing is okay. I need you to open a file." "Who is the target?" Leonard asked, his tone shifting instantly from sleepy to professional. "Bradley Pierce," I said. "My future son-in-law. What do you need, a background check?" "No," I said. "I want a dissection. I want to know everything. I want his bank statements, his credit card receipts, his deleted emails, and his text messages. I want to know who he owes money to. I want to know the name of the woman he is seeing on the side. I want to know what he ate for breakfast 3 years ago." There was a pause on the line. "Clint, the wedding is in 2 months. This is going to be expensive, and it is going to be ugly. I don't care about the cost," I said. "I want him destroyed, Leo. I want to bury him so deep that he will need a map to find sunlight." "Understood," Leonard said. "I will start tonight." I hung up the phone and started the car. I drove home, the streetlights blurring past me. I thought about the check I had given Bradley. $50,000. It was a lot of money to most people. To me, it was bait. I knew exactly where that money was going. It wasn't going to a house deposit. It was going to a bookie or a debt collector. And once he cashed it, I would have him on wire fraud and theft by deception. I pulled into my driveway and looked at the dark windows of my empty house. My wife Diana had been gone for 5 years. She would have gutted Bradley with a kitchen knife the moment he called our daughter a cow. I missed her ferocity. I went inside, poured myself a glass of cheap bourbon, old habits from my trucking days die hard, and sat in my leather armchair. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, replaying the conversation in the bathroom over and over in my head. I would rather chew glass than touch that cow. "Enjoy the glass, Bradley," I whispered to the empty room, "because I am about to feed you a whole banquet of it." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Thank you for everything, Dad. I love you. Brad is so happy about the house. We are so lucky." I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to tell her to run. I wanted to tell her to pack a bag and come home, but I couldn't. Not yet. If I told her now, she would confront him. He would lie. He would gaslight her. He would say I was a jealous old man trying to control her. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, cold, hard evidence that would shatter her delusions instantly. I needed her to see the monster, not just hear about him. I put the phone down. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I had a war to plan. The engagement party was just the opening shot. Bradley Pierce thought he had hit the jackpot. He thought he had found a desperate woman and a senile father. He was celebrating tonight. He was probably laughing with Chad spending my money in his head. Let him laugh. Let him feel safe. Let him climb as high as he wants. The fall is always deadlier from the top. I finished my bourbon and set the glass down with a sharp clink. The investigation had begun. The trap was set, and I was just getting started. The digital clock on my nightstand flipped to 3:14 a.m. The silence in my house usually brought me peace, a hard-earned reward after decades of noise, the roar of diesel engines, the shouting on loading docks, the endless ringing of phones in the boardroom. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. My phone sat on the mahogany surface, a black monolith holding the potential to ruin or save my daughter's life. When it finally vibrated, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. It wasn't Leonard. It was Sarah. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear, forcing my voice to be steady, to be the rock she had always leaned on. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, sitting up in the darkness. "It is late. Is everything all right?" The sound that came back was a jagged, wet gasp for air. She was crying, that deep, chest-heaving sobbing that usually only happens when someone has died. My blood went cold. The trucker instinct in me wanted to grab a tire iron and drive to her apartment, to smash through the door and handle whatever was hurting her. But the CEO in me knew I had to sit still. I had to listen. "Daddy," she choked out, her voice small and broken. I don't think I can do this. I don't think I am good enough for him." I gripped the phone tight enough to crack the screen. Good enough for him, for the parasite who laughed about chewing glass rather than touching her, Sarah. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and firm. "You are Sarah Sullivan. You are brilliant. You are kind. You are worth 10 of him. What happened? Did he say something to you?" There was a pause filled only by her ragged breathing. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper of shame that tore my heart into ribbons. "We were looking at the wedding photos from the engagement party," she said. He told me that the camera adds 10 pounds, but that I looked like I had eaten the camera too. He said he was just worried about me, Dad. He said that when we are standing at the altar, everyone will be looking at us, and he doesn't want people to wonder why a guy like him is with a girl like me. The rage that filled me was white-hot, a blinding flash that made my vision swim. I wanted to roar. I wanted to tell her what he had said in the bathroom. I wanted to tell her he was a gambling addict who was only marrying her to pay off his bookie. But I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. If I attacked him now while she was this vulnerable, she would retreat. She would cling to him. He had already planted the seeds of insecurity so deep that she was watering them with her own tears. This was gaslighting in its purest, filthiest form. He was breaking her down so she would be grateful for the scraps of affection he threw her way. "That is nonsense, Sarah," I said, fighting to keep the growl out of my voice. "You are beautiful. You have your mother's eyes and her smile. He is lucky to be in the same room as you." "No, Dad, you don't understand." She interrupted me, and this was the part that hurt the most. She was defending him. She was justifying the knife he was twisting in her gut. "He is right. He just has high standards because he is so successful." He suggested, He suggested I go see a consultant tomorrow about liposuction. He said if I do it now, I will be healed in time for the wedding. He even offered to find the doctor for me. He says it is because he loves me and wants me to be my best self. Liposuction. He wanted to carve up my daughter to fit his ego. Or worse, he probably had a deal with the clinic, a kickback for referrals. Or he would ask me for the money for the surgery and pocket it. The depths of his depravity seemed to have no bottom. I closed my eyes, picturing Sarah alone in her apartment, looking in the mirror and hating what she saw because a con artist told her to. I remembered when she was 6 years old crying because a boy at school pulled her pigtails. I had fixed it then. I could fix this now, but the method had to be surgical. I couldn't just cut him out. I had to make her want to cut him out. Sweetheart, I said, forcing a calmness I did not feel. If you want to do that for yourself, that is one thing. But do not do it for him. A man who loves you as you are. He does love me, she insisted, her voice gaining a frantic edge. He is just stressed about the wedding. He wants everything to be perfect. I just need to try harder. I need to be the wife he deserves. I am sorry for calling so late, Dad. I needed to hear your voice. I will be better tomorrow, I promise. She hung up before I could say another word. The silence rushed back into the room, but now it felt toxic. I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting a greedy fiancé. I was fighting a brainwashing. He had hollowed her out. He had taken the confident, smart woman who ran my logistics division and turned her into a frightened little girl begging for approval. This wasn't just about money anymore. If he had just wanted my fortune, I might have written him a check to leave town. But he was destroying her spirit. He was taking the one thing I had left of Diana and crushing it for sport. My phone buzzed again. It was a text message, but not from Sarah. It was from Leonard. I found the bookie, and I found the girl. You are going to want to see this. I looked at the screen, the blue light illuminating my face in the darkness. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, mechanical resolve. Sarah was in pain, and I had to let her feel it for a little while longer. It was the only way she would wake up. But while she was crying, I would be sharpening the blade. I typed back a single word. Send. I didn't go back to sleep. I got out of bed, dressed in my gray sweats, and went to my home office. I sat at the heavy oak desk that had belonged to my father and opened my laptop. The files from Leonard started coming in. Bank statements showing withdrawals at casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City. Photos of Bradley with a blonde woman who was definitely not my daughter, their hands all over each other, at a resort in Cabo San Lucas when he was supposed to be at a business conference in Denver. I looked at the timestamps. The trip to Cabo was 3 weeks ago. Sarah had been picking out flower arrangements while he was drinking margaritas with his mistress. I printed every single page. The hum of the printer was the sound of ammunition being manufactured. I organized the photos into a neat stack. I highlighted the negative balances on his bank accounts. I created a dossier of destruction. My daughter thought she wasn't good enough. She thought she was the problem. I looked at the face of the man smiling in the photo, blissfully unaware that his life was being dismantled, paper by paper, in a dark office across town. Cry tonight, Sarah, I whispered to the empty room. Because when this is over, you will never shed a tear for this piece of trash again. And Bradley, you wanted perfection. I am going to give you a perfect ending. 3 days later, Leonard sat across from me in my study. He did not touch the coffee I had poured for him. He did not make small talk about the weather or the game last night. He simply slid a thick manila envelope across the mahogany desk. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was a dry whisper, like tires skidding on gravel just before a crash. I picked up the file. I did not open it with trembling hands. I did not hesitate. I spent 40 years in the cab of a Peterbilt, hauling steel and timber across every interstate in this country before I bought my first fleet. When you are hauling 80,000 pounds down a 6% grade in a blizzard, you do not panic. You check your gauges. You check your mirrors. You make the necessary adjustments to keep the rig on the road. I put on my reading glasses and opened the dossier. I read it exactly the way I used to read a bill of lading or a driver's logbook. I was looking for discrepancies. I was looking for the rot beneath the cargo. The first page was a spreadsheet of numbers. It was a financial autopsy. Bradley Pierce was not just broke. He was underwater and the pressure was crushing him. $250,000 in debt. It was not student loans. It was not a failed business investment. It was online poker and sports betting. There were transfers to offshore accounts and regular cash withdrawals at ATMs near underground casinos in the warehouse district. I ran my finger down the column of figures. He was paying interest on interest. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now he planned to rob Sarah to pay everyone else. My daughter was not a wife to him. She was a bailout package. I flipped the page. The logistics of his infidelity were documented with the precision of a shipping manifest. Leonard had done his job well. There were photos taken with a telephoto lens, grainy but undeniable. Meet Jessica. She was 24 years old. She was his administrative assistant. The photos showed them at lunch, at dinner, entering a Motel 6 off the turnpike at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I looked at the timestamps. That Tuesday, Sarah had called me excited because she had found the perfect venue for the rehearsal dinner. While my daughter was planning their future, Bradley was in a cheap motel room laughing at her with another woman. I did not feel sadness. Sadness is a luxury for people who have time to grieve. I felt the cold, mechanical click of a transmission shifting gears. I was moving from observation to operation. Then came the transcripts. Leonard had retrieved deleted text messages from a cloud backup. This was the hazardous material. I read a conversation between Bradley and his best man, Chad. The text read, "I cannot believe I have to pretend to listen to the old man's war stories about the road. He smells like diesel and desperation. As soon as the ink is dry on the marriage license, I am putting him in a home. We will sell off the logistics company for parts. No one needs a trucking company run by a dinosaur." I stopped reading. I took off my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose. He smells like diesel. I looked at my hands. They were manicured now, soft from years of office work. But I remembered when they were permanently stained with grease and oil. I remembered sleeping in laybys in Arizona with a tire iron under my seat because I had to protect my cargo. I remembered missing my wife's birthdays and my daughter's school plays because I was driving through the night to build the empire that this boy wanted to sell for parts. He did not just want my money. He wanted to erase my legacy. He wanted to take the sweat and blood I had poured into my company and turn it into chips at a poker table. I looked up at Leonard. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I saw the disgust in his eyes. "He is thorough," I said, my voice flat. "He is reckless," Leonard replied. "He is arrogant. He thinks he is the smartest man in the room because he wears a $1,000 suit. He does not realize he is walking through a minefield." I closed the file. I did not slam it shut. I closed it gently, like closing the lid on a coffin. "He wants to sell the company," I said. "He wants to put me in a home." "He has already contacted a broker," Leonard said. "He made a preliminary inquiry about the valuation of Sullivan Logistics. He told them he would have controlling interest within 6 months." I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark driveway. I saw my reflection in the glass. I did not look like a dinosaur. I looked like a man who had just checked the load and found it secure. "He thinks I am a senile old trucker," I whispered to the glass. "He thinks I am just a checkbook with a pulse." I turned back to Leonard. Do not touch him yet, I said. Let him run. Let him think the road is clear. Leonard nodded. And Sarah? She needs to see the crash, I said. If I tell her now, she will not believe me. She will think I am the villain. She needs to see the wreckage with her own eyes. I sat back down at my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a bottle of cheap rye whiskey, the kind I used to drink when I could barely afford to fill the tank. I poured 2 glasses. I pushed one toward Leonard. Drink up, Leo, I said. We have a lot of work to do. He wants to play games with my company. I am going to show him how we handle hijackers in this business. I picked up the file again. I memorized the name of the bookie. I memorized the address of the motel. I memorized the timestamps. This was not just evidence anymore. This was the route map for his destruction. Bradley Pierce wanted to take the wheel, fine. I was going to let him drive. But I was going to cut the brake lines first. The following Tuesday morning, I sat in my corner office on the top floor of the Sullivan Logistics headquarters. The view from here was usually my favorite thing in the world. I could see the vast expanse of the distribution yard, the rows of 18-wheelers lined up like soldiers, and the constant rhythmic movement of commerce that I had built from nothing. But today I kept the blinds drawn halfway down. I needed the room to feel smaller, dimmer. I needed to look like a man whose empire had become a burden rather than a triumph. I had spent an hour before Bradley arrived setting the stage. I loosened my tie until it looked sloppy. I left a bottle of antacids conspicuously on the desk. I even practiced a heavy, weary sigh that rattled in my chest. If Bradley Pierce wanted to believe I was a dinosaur on the verge of extinction, I was going to give him a fossil. Leonard had drafted the document sitting in front of me. It was 40 pages of dense legal terminology bound in a blue folder. It was a masterpiece of entrapment. It was not just a contract. It was a bear trap painted gold. My assistant buzzed in. Mr. Pierce is here, sir. Send him in, I said, making my voice sound thin and tired. The door opened and Bradley walked in. He was wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He walked with a strut, a bounce in his step that screamed ownership. He looked around the office, his eyes lingering on the mahogany shelves, the leather sofa, and the scale models of my fleet. He was not looking at a workspace. He was measuring the drapes. He was imagining himself sitting in my chair. "Dad," he said, flashing that bright, predatory smile. "You wanted to see me, is everything okay?" You sounded serious on the phone. I stood up slowly, pressing my hands against the desk, as if lifting my own weight was a struggle. I didn't offer a firm handshake. I offered a weak, trembling grip. "Sit down, son," I said, gesturing to the chair opposite me. "I needed to talk to you. Man to man." Bradley sat crossing his legs comfortably. He leaned forward, feigning concern, but I saw the hunger in his eyes. He was like a shark, sensing blood in the water. "What is it?" "Clint, is it your health?" I sighed, letting my shoulders slump. "It is everything, Brad. The business, the stress, the constant fighting with the unions and the board. I am 68 years old. I have spent my life on the road or in this office. I am tired. I look at you and I see energy. I see the future." Bradley nodded, trying to look solemn, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "I understand. You have worked hard. You deserve a break." "I deserve to rest," I corrected him. "I want to retire, Brad. I want to step down as CEO. I want to hand the reins over to someone I trust, someone who is going to be family." I watched him process the words. It was like watching a slot machine hit the jackpot. His pupils dilated. He sat up straighter. This was it. The moment he had been scheming for. The coup was happening without him even having to lift a finger. "I would be honored, Clint," he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound serious and executive. You know I have ideas. I can take this company to the next level. I will protect your legacy. I know you will, I lied. But there is a problem. Bradley frowned. What problem? The board of directors, I said. They are old-fashioned. They are stubborn. They are worried about nepotism. They are worried that you are marrying Sarah just for the position. They need assurance. They need to see that you are committed to the family, not just the assets. I leaned forward, looking him in the eye. I had to sell this next part perfectly. They are insisting on a prenuptial agreement, Brad. I saw the flash of anger in his eyes. It was quick, sharp, and dangerous. He opened his mouth to protest, to play the offended lover, but I cut him off before he could speak. I told them it was insulting, I said quickly. I told them you love Sarah, but they control the voting shares. If I want to appoint you as my successor, I have to give them this. I slid the blue folder across the desk. But I made sure the terms are generous, I added. I told my lawyers to write it in your favor. If you are going to run my company, you need to be protected too. Bradley picked up the folder. He opened it suspiciously. He didn't read the whole thing. Men like Bradley never read the fine print because they think they already know how the world works. He scanned the pages looking for the numbers. Look at clause 4. B, I said helpfully. He turned the page. I watched his eyes scan the text. I saw the exact moment he read the number. If the marriage dissolves after 2 years for any reason initiated by Sarah Sullivan, Mr. Bradley Pierce shall receive a lump sum payment of $5 million as compensation for his time and contribution to the family estate. $5 million. He looked up at me stunned. $5 million, it is the golden parachute, I said with a shrug. I want you to feel secure, Brad. I know Sarah can be difficult. She is emotional. She has my temper. If things do not work out, I do not want you walking away empty-handed. I want you to know that your time with us is valued. I saw the calculation happening in his brain. It was simple math. Marry the fat girl, wait 2 years, run the company, maybe drive it into the ground or sell it off. Then get Sarah to file for divorce, which would be easy enough. Just make her miserable and walk away with $5 million cash. It was the easiest payday of his life. This is very generous, Clint, he said, trying to suppress a grin. I mean, I don't plan on us ever divorcing. I love Sarah, but I appreciate the security. I know you do, son, I said. There is just one other thing. The board insisted on a morality clause. It is standard stuff, just to protect the company's image. I pointed to the bottom of page 32. The text was dense, boring, and seemingly innocuous. Clause 14. C. The infidelity and conduct provision. The text read that if the marriage dissolved due to proven infidelity fraud or documented intent to defraud the Sullivan family estate by Mr. Bradley Pierce, all financial compensations, including the $5 million payout, would be null and void. Furthermore, Mr. Pierce would be liable for all legal fees and any funds advanced by the Sullivan family prior to the marriage. Bradley glanced at it. He didn't pause. Why would he? In his mind, he wasn't going to get caught. He had been cheating on Sarah for months, and she didn't have a clue. He thought he was invisible. He thought he was smarter than the old man in the rumpled suit. He didn't know that I had photos of him entering a Motel 6 in my bottom drawer. He didn't know I had transcripts of him calling my daughter a cow. He didn't know that documented intent to defraud included text messages to his best friend about selling my company for parts. Oh, this is fine, Bradley said dismissively. I have eyes only for Sarah. This doesn't apply to me. I pulled a Mont Blanc pen from my pocket. It was heavy black and expensive. I uncapped it and held it out to him. Then we have a deal, I said. You sign this and I announce your succession at the wedding reception. The company is yours, Brad. He took the pen. His hand didn't shake. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask to show it to a lawyer because his greed was screaming so loud it drowned out his survival instinct. He signed his name with a flourish, the ink dark and permanent on the crisp white paper. He handed the pen back to me. He leaned back in the chair, and the transformation was instant. The deferential son-in-law vanished. He looked at me with a new boldness. He was already the CEO in his mind. He was already imagining which of my employees he would fire first. "Thanks, Clint," he said, dropping the dad. "You won't regret this." I took the folder and closed it. I placed it squarely in the center of the desk. "I know I won't," I said. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I have to run. I have a meeting with the caterers. Sarah wants to change the flowers again. You know how she gets." I nodded. "I know. Give her my love." I watched him walk to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob and looked back at me. "By the way, Clint," he said, "once the wedding is over, we should talk about modernizing the fleet. Those old Peterbilts are costing a fortune in maintenance. We should lease new units, cut costs." He was already dismantling my legacy. He was already selling off the trucks I had bought with my own sweat. "We will talk about it," I said, "after the wedding." He winked at me and walked out. The door clicked shut. The silence returned to the office. I sat there for a long time staring at the blue folder. I touched the leather cover. It felt cold. He had signed it. He had walked right into the cage and locked the door behind him. I picked up the phone and dialed Leonard. "He signed," I said. "Good," Leonard replied. "I just got the footage from the car." "What footage?" I asked. "You gave him the Mercedes yesterday, right?" Leonard asked. "Yes. Well, he took it for a test drive last night, with Jessica." "You are going to want a drink before you watch this, Clint. It is explicit." And he talks about the plan. He says it out loud. I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my gut. It was done. The trap wasn't just set. It had been sprung. Bradley Pierce was walking around as a dead man. He just didn't know he had stopped breathing yet. "Send it to the secure server," I said. "And Leo, make sure the police are on standby for the wedding. We are going to need them." I hung up and turned my chair to face the window. I looked out at the trucks moving in the yard. I wasn't tired. I wasn't old. I was the man who kept this country moving, and I had just secured the most important cargo of my life, my daughter's freedom. The waiting room of the aesthetic surgery clinic smelled of lavender and rubbing alcohol, a scent that tried to mask the pain being purchased behind the frosted glass doors. I sat in a leather chair that cost more than the transmission on my first rig, thumbing through a magazine I was not reading. My leg bounced nervously, a habit from long nights hauling freight across the interstates when the coffee wore off, and only adrenaline kept the wheels turning. But I was not driving tonight. I was the passenger in a vehicle heading straight for a cliff, and I had to keep my mouth shut while the driver accelerated. The door opened, and the surgeon beckoned us in. He was a man with teeth too white and skin too tight, a salesman of insecurities. Sarah walked in with her head down, wearing a hospital gown that seemed to shrink her spirit even further. Bradley walked in like he owned the building. He had his hand on the small of her back, not in a gesture of support, but of ownership, a steering hand guiding a piece of livestock. I stood in the corner, the silent bankroll, the fading father. The surgeon picked up a black marker. The sound of the cap popping off was loud in the sterile silence. He asked Sarah to stand on a small platform. She shivered. The air conditioning was freezing. Bradley crossed his arms and critiqued her like he was inspecting a used truck for rust. "Take a little more off the hips, Doc," he said, pointing a manicured finger at my daughter. "And the arms. She wants to look toned in the dress. We do not want any spillover." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide and wet with humiliation. She was begging me to stop it. She was begging me to be her dad, to roar like a lion, and throw these two men through the window. Every fiber of my being screamed to do it. My muscles tensed, ready to strike. I wanted to grab that marker and shove it down Bradley's throat, but I forced myself to stay frozen. If I saved her now, she would resent me. She would think I was controlling her. She would think I did not want her to be beautiful. She needed to feel the cold tip of that marker on her skin. She needed to hear the man she loved reducing her body to a series of problem areas to be surgically removed. I cleared my throat and adjusted my hearing aid, feigning a moment of confusion. "Is this safe, doctor?" I asked, my voice quavering just enough. "My Sarah is perfect to me, but she says this is what modern brides do." Bradley rolled his eyes at the surgeon, a silent commiseration about the senile old man in the corner. "It is very safe, Mr. Sullivan," the doctor said smoothly. "Routine. We will just sculpt her a little, help her reach her potential." Sculpt her. Like she was clay. Like she wasn't a living, breathing woman who had graduated with honors and managed a fleet of 500 trucks. "Do it," Sarah whispered. "Just do it. I want to look right." I watched as the doctor drew black circles on her skin, mapping out her insecurities. I wrote the check for the deposit right there in the office. $30,000 to mutilate my daughter's self-esteem. As I handed it to the receptionist, I felt like I was paying a ransom, but the hostage was not coming home yet. The torture did not end at the clinic. It followed us to the dinner table. 2 nights later, I invited them over to the house. I had spent the afternoon in the kitchen cooking Sarah's favorite meal. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes slow-cooked until the meat fell apart with a fork. It was the meal Diana used to make when Sarah had a bad day at school. It was comfort on a plate. The house smelled of thyme and beef broth, a smell that usually brought a smile to Sarah's face. When they arrived, she walked into the kitchen and inhaled deeply, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "Oh, Dad, that smells amazing," she said, reaching for a roll from the basket. Bradley's hand shot out and slapped her wrist. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to sting, hard enough to shock. "No carbs, babe," he said, his voice sharp. "The surgery is in 2 weeks. You are on a liquid prep diet. Do you want the doctor to have to cut deeper? Do you want scars?" Sarah pulled her hand back like she had been burned. She looked at the roll and then at Bradley. "Just one, Brad." "I am starving. I haven't eaten since breakfast." Bradley laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Starving, honey, you have plenty of reserves. You are not going to starve. Drink some water, it fills the stomach." He took the basket of rolls and moved them to the other side of the table out of her reach. Then he looked at me. "Dad, you have to stop enabling her. If you want her to be healthy, you have to help me keep her disciplined. We are doing this for her own good." I looked at the pot roast sitting in the center of the table, steaming and rich. I looked at my daughter, who was pale and shaking from low blood sugar. I picked up the carving knife. The handle felt heavy and solid. It would be so easy. One movement. Instead, I sliced the meat. "He is right, sweetheart," I said, my voice tasting like bile. "You want to look good for the photos. We all want you to shine. Maybe just have some broth tonight." Sarah looked at me and something in her eyes died. The light went out. She slumped in her chair, defeated by the 2 men who were supposed to protect her. She drank her water. I ate the roast. It tasted like ash. I chewed and swallowed, forcing the food down while my daughter watched me with hungry, hollow eyes. I was starving her to save her, and the guilt was a physical weight in my gut, heavier than any load I had ever hauled. But Bradley was not done. He needed total control. He needed to cut off her escape routes. The next morning, I received a notification from the bank. I had set up alerts on all of Sarah's accounts years ago, just in case of fraud. But this fraud was walking through the front door. Bradley had convinced her to merge their finances. It was the modern thing to do, he had told her. They were building an empire together. He needed capital to invest in their future. I sat in my office and watched the transactions roll in on my screen. He drained her savings account. $40,000 transferred to an account in the Caymans. He maxed out her credit cards on purchases that had nothing to do with a wedding. Watches, suits, a down payment on a boat. Then came the phone call. Dad. Sarah said, her voice trembling so hard I could barely understand her. I am at the gas station. My card was declined. I don't have any cash. Can you transfer me $50? My daughter, the heiress to a logistics company worth millions, was stranded at a gas station begging for $50 because a con artist had picked her clean. Where is Brad? I asked, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling to keep the tears from falling. He is in a meeting, she said quickly, defending him, even as she stood there humiliated. He moved some money around for investments. The transfers haven't cleared yet. He is just so smart with money, Dad. He is securing our retirement. He was securing his getaway. I transferred the money. Just enough for gas. I couldn't give her more. If I gave her $1,000, Bradley would take it. If I gave her access to the main accounts, he would drain them before the ink dried on the wedding certificate. I had to keep her poor. I had to keep her desperate. I know it is hard, Sarah, I said, playing the role of the oblivious old man. But money is tight these days. You listen to Brad. He knows what he is doing with the markets. I hung up the phone and threw a crystal paperweight across the room. It shattered against the wall, exploding into 1,000 shards of glass. I was breaking her. I was letting him break her. Every day I saw her, she looked thinner, not just in body but in spirit. She was fading. The vibrant, laughing woman who could negotiate a union contract without blinking was gone, replaced by a ghost who asked permission to eat a bread roll. But I also saw the cracks forming. I saw the way she looked at him when he snapped at her. I saw the hesitation when he reached for hers. The pressure was building. I just had to make sure that when she finally exploded, she aimed the blast in the right direction. I walked over to the shattered glass on the floor. I didn't clean it up. I left it there as a reminder. Broken things can cut. And Sarah was getting sharper by the day. My phone buzzed. Leonard. He just listed her apartment for sale. He forged her signature on the power of attorney. I stared at the message. He was selling her home out from under her. He was burning the bridge so she would have nowhere to run when he finally discarded her. Let the listing go live, I typed back. I was not going to stop him. I was going to let him dig the hole so deep that he would never be able to climb out. And when he fell, I would be standing at the top, holding the shovel. The private dining room at Le Bernardin smelled of old money and fresh oysters. I sat at the head of the table, nursing a glass of tap water, waiting for the people who had raised a monster. Richard and Karen Pierce arrived 20 minutes late. They did not apologize. They swept into the room with the air of royalty visiting the colonies. Richard wore a suit that was too shiny, the kind that looks expensive from a distance but feels like polyester up close. Karen was dripping in jewelry that I suspected was zirconium. They were the architects of Bradley's entitlement, the blueprint for his greed. Clint, Richard said, extending a hand that felt like a dead fish. Good to see you. We had a hell of a time parking the Jaguar. Valet service in this city has gone to the dogs. I shook his hand briefly. The Jaguar was leased. Leonard's report had confirmed it that morning. They were 3 months behind on the payments. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the empty chairs. Sarah and Brad are on their way. They are coming from the dress fitting. Karen sat down and immediately picked up the menu, scanning the prices instead of the food items. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. I hope you don't mind, Clint, she said with a tight smile. We ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon for the table before we came in. We thought we should celebrate. After all, it is not every day our Bradley marries into, well, settles down. Into money. I finished the sentence in my head. Of course, I said aloud. Order whatever you like. It is on me. They did. They ordered the tasting menu with the wine pairing. They ordered caviar supplements. They ate like people who were starving but trying to look bored by the abundance. When Sarah and Bradley finally arrived, the dynamic in the room shifted. Sarah looked exhausted. Her dress hung loosely on her frame, evidence of the starvation diet Bradley had enforced. She smiled when she saw us, but it was a fragile thing like cracked glass. Bradley kissed his mother on the cheek and shook his father's hand. He ignored me until he realized I was watching him. "Dad," he said, giving me a nod. "Good to see you." Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Richard spent the first course talking about his glory days as a consultant, a vague term that I knew actually meant he moved money between failing shell companies. He asked me about my business, but not out of interest. He asked with the sneer of a man who thinks manual labor is a disease. So Clint Richard said, wiping grease from his lip with a linen napkin, "Brad tells me you started as a driver, like actually driving the trucks." "That is right," I said, cutting my steak. 18 wheels and a prayer. Richard chuckled, looking at Karen. "Fascinating. I suppose it must be quaint to build a business with your hands." We always focused on intellectual capital, strategy, the big picture. It is good that Brad is stepping in. You need someone with a modern touch, someone who doesn't smell like the highway. I chewed my steak slowly. It was perfectly cooked, but it tasted like cardboard. He was insulting me at my own table, eating my food, drinking my wine, and telling me I was obsolete. "Brad has a lot of energy," I said neutrally. Karen chimed in, looking at Sarah. "And Sarah, darling, you look better. The diet is working, although you still have a little bit of a chin situation happening. Maybe ask the photographer to shoot from above." Sarah put down her fork. She hadn't taken a bite. She looked at Bradley, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for him to tell his mother to shut up. Bradley just nodded. "Mom has a good eye, babe. You should listen to her. We want the photos to be timeless." I gripped my steak knife. The handle dug into my palm. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to tell Karen that her necklace was fake and her son was a thief, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel like they had won. I cleared my throat. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy velvet box. It wasn't a ring box. It was the size of a brick. I put it on the table. The sound it made was heavy and expensive. The conversation stopped. Richard's eyes darted to the box. Karen stopped chewing. Bradley sat up straighter. "I know things have been stressful," I said, making my voice sound weary and sentimental. "The wedding planning, the diet, the business transition. I know I am an old trucker. I don't know much about intellectual capital or strategy, but I know about taking care of family." I opened the box. Inside, resting on black satin, was a set of heavy brass keys. They gleamed under the chandelier light. "This is for you," I said, looking at Bradley and Sarah. But mostly I was looking at Bradley's parents. I wanted to see the greed hit them. Bradley's breath hitched. "Is this—" "It is the house in the hills," I said. "The one you wanted. The deposit wasn't enough. I bought it outright. Cash. It is yours. A wedding gift." The silence was shattered by a collective gasp from the pierced side of the table. Richard choked on his wine. Karen's eyes bulged. Bradley reached out and touched the keys as if they were a holy relic. "You bought it," Bradley whispered. "The whole thing debt-free," I said. $3 million, 5 bedrooms, pool, guest house. It is all yours." Karen let out a squeal of delight. She clapped her hands together. "Oh, Clint, you are— well, you are magnificent." "A house, Richard. Did you hear? Our son has a mansion. Richard leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. He looked at me differently now. I wasn't just a dirty trucker anymore. I was a golden goose. Well, Clint, he said, raising his glass. I must say, you know how to step up. This is a proper start for a Pierce. A proper start for a Pierce, not a Sullivan. He was already erasing my daughter's name from the deed in his mind. Bradley grabbed the keys. He didn't hand them to Sarah. He shoved them into his own pocket. Thank you, Dad, he said, his eyes shining with victory. You won't regret this. We are going to make it a showplace. Sarah looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. Dad, this is too much. You shouldn't have. I smiled at her, a sad, tired smile. Nothing is too much for you, sweetheart. I want you to be safe. I watched them celebrate. Richard ordered another bottle of champagne. Karen started talking about redecorating the guest house for when they came to visit for extended stays. Bradley was texting under the table, probably telling Chad or his mistress that he had just scored a $3 million payday. They didn't ask about the paperwork. They didn't ask to see the deed. They were so blinded by the shiny brass keys that they didn't ask a single question. If they had, they might have noticed that the keys were not accompanied by a title transfer. They might have learned that the house was not purchased in Bradley's name or even Sarah's name. It was purchased by the Sullivan Family Charitable Trust, a legal entity I had established 20 years ago to support retired drivers. Technically, legally, and irrevocably, the house was an asset of the charity. Bradley and Sarah were listed as caretakers with a revocable right of residency. It was a glorified rental agreement, and the lease had a clause. A very specific, very brutal clause. Residency is contingent upon the moral standing of the occupants and their employment within the Sullivan Logistics Corporation. Any act of fraud, embezzlement, or criminal activity immediately terminates the agreement and results in immediate eviction and liability for fair market rent for the duration of the stay. I wasn't giving them a house. I was giving them a prison cell with a pool. And the moment I exposed Bradley, the trust would kick him to the curb and sue him for back rent. But tonight, I let them drink the champagne. I let Richard brag about his son's success. I let Karen plan her garden parties in my yard. I sat there, the dumb, generous trucker, and I watched them dig their own graves with silver spoons. When the check came, Richard didn't even reach for his wallet. He just looked at me and smiled. "Great dinner, Clint," he said. "Really top-notch." I paid the bill. $2,000. It was a cheap price for the look on their faces when the axe finally fell. As we walked out to the valet stand, Bradley put his arm around Sarah. He pulled her close, but his eyes were on the valet bringing around the Mercedes I had given him. "I love you, babe," he said loud enough for me to hear. "We are going to be so happy in that house." Sarah leaned into him, desperate to believe him. "I love you too, Brad." I watched them drive away. Richard and Karen followed in their leased Jaguar, honking the horn in celebration. I stood on the sidewalk alone. The night air was cool. I took a deep breath. "Enjoy the house, Bradley," I whispered. "Don't unpack." I got into my car. My phone buzzed. It was Leonard. "I have the final piece," the message read. "The wedding is in 3 days. Are we still a go?" I looked at the message. I thought about Sarah's hollow eyes. I thought about Karen's insults. I thought about the keys in Bradley's pocket. "We are a go," I typed. "Load the cannon." The dinner was over. The pleasantries were finished. Now it was time for the slaughter. The night before my only daughter's wedding was not spent pacing the floor or rehearsing a sentimental toast about love and commitment. It was spent in the dark silence of my home office, sitting in the same leather chair, where I had built an empire, staring at the glowing rectangle of my laptop screen. The house was empty. Sarah was staying at the bridal suite in the hotel, trying to get her beauty sleep for the big day, unaware that the man she was dreaming about was currently starring in a horror movie on my computer. I had a bottle of Old Crow on the desk. It was bottom shelf whiskey, the kind that burns going down and leaves a taste of gasoline in your throat. It was the only thing I drank when I was driving long haul because it was cheap and it did the job. Tonight, I needed it. I needed to remember who I was. I needed to remember the grit and the dirt because I was about to wade through a sewer. Leonard had uploaded the file an hour ago. The file name was innocuous, just a string of dates and timestamps, but I knew what it contained. It was the footage from the internal camera I had installed in the Mercedes S-Class, the $80,000 engagement gift that Bradley had driven away in with a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. I took a long pull from the bottle, feeling the liquid fire coat my stomach. Then I pressed play. The video was high definition, crisp and clear, even in the low light of the car interior. The timestamp showed 11:30 p.m., just 2 hours after our dinner, just 2 hours after I had handed him the keys to a mansion. Bradley was in the driver's seat. He had loosened his tie, the silk hanging limp around his neck. Next to him in the passenger seat, where my daughter should have been, sat Jessica. She was young blonde and laughing. Her feet were on the dashboard, her heels digging into the expensive leather I had paid for. "I cannot believe he bought it," she said, her voice tinny through the speakers but clear enough to cut glass. "A whole mansion, Brad. You are a legend." Bradley laughed. That sound. That same cold, sharp laugh I had heard in the bathroom at the engagement party. It made the hair on my arms stand up. "I told you, baby," he said, reaching over to rest his hand on her knee. The old man is soft. He is desperate to unload his cow of a daughter. He would pay me double if I asked for it. Did you see his face when I signed the prenup? He thought he was being so clever with his little clauses. I leaned closer to the screen, watching his face. He looked demonic in the dashboard lights, shadows dancing across his eyes. "He thinks he trapped me," Jessica giggled. "What was it?" "The infidelity clause," Bradley snorted. "A piece of paper. That is all it is. Who is going to prove anything?" The old man goes to bed at 8 o'clock, and Sarah. She is so dumb she thinks I am working late when I am with you. I could bring you into our bed and tell her you are a sleep therapist, and she would believe me. She is pathetic, Jess. Just pathetic. I felt a vein throb in my temple. I took another drink. I wanted to reach through the screen and choke the life out of him, but I forced myself to watch. I needed to see it all. I needed to fill the tank with enough hate to fuel what I had to do tomorrow. The car was parked somewhere secluded, overlooking the city lights. I watched as they moved together. I watched the betrayal happen in real time in the car I bought for his wedding. But it was the conversation after that truly sealed his fate. It was the conversation that turned this from a cheating scandal into a death sentence. They were lying back in the reclined seats, sharing a cigarette. The smoke curled up toward the camera lens. "So what is the plan, really?" Jessica asked, tracing a finger down his arm. "Can we really pull this off? 2 years is a long time to pretend." Bradley exhaled a plume of smoke. "It is not 2 years. That is just the safety net. Listen to me. Once we are married tomorrow, the clock starts ticking on the company. Clint wants to retire. He is going to hand over operational control within the month. I already have the buyers lined up for the fleet." He took a drag of the cigarette, his eyes gleaming. "We strip the assets," he said calmly, like he was talking about ordering lunch. "We sell the trucks. We sell the warehouses. The real estate alone is worth $50 million. We liquidate everything. We take the cash and we bury it in shell companies where the old man cannot touch it. By the time he realizes the company is hollowed out, it will be too late." And Sarah, Jessica asked. "What about the cow?" Bradley smirked. "That is the best part. Once I have the money secured, I do not need to wait for the divorce. I am going to make her life such a living hell she will leave me. I will move her into the guest house. I will tell her she is too fat to be seen in public. I will cut off her access to the accounts. I will break her down until she is begging for a divorce just to escape. And then I will point to the prenup and say she filed so I get the payout." He laughed again. "I am going to kick her out of her own house, Jess. I am going to throw her clothes on the lawn and change the locks. And then you and I are going to redecorate." I paused the video. I sat in the silence, the hum of the computer fan the only sound in the room. I looked at the frozen image of Bradley's face twisted in a sneer of pure malice. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a predator. He was planning to psychologically torture my daughter. He was planning to imprison her in her own home, starve her of resources, and break her mind until she crumbled. He wanted to destroy my life's work and leave my child in the ruins. I finished the bottle of Old Crow. I set the empty glass down on the desk. "You made a mistake, Bradley," I whispered to the screen. "You thought you were playing chess with a pigeon. You thought you could knock over the pieces and strut around." I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh flash drive. I plugged it in and copied the video file. I copied the audio file from the bathroom. I copied the bank statements Leonard had found. I copied the text messages. I held the drive in my hand. It was small, light plastic, but it weighed more than a freight train. It was the payload. I stood up and walked to the closet. I pulled out my tuxedo. It was freshly pressed, hanging in a plastic bag. I looked at it. Tomorrow I was going to walk my daughter down the aisle. I was going to give her away. But I wasn't giving her to Bradley. I was giving her back to herself. I went to the window and looked out at the night. The sky was beginning to turn a majestic purple in the east. Dawn was coming. The wedding day. Most fathers worry about the weather on their daughter's wedding day. They worry about the catering. They worry about the band. I wasn't worried about any of that. I went back to the computer and opened my email. I drafted a message to the head of security at the venue, a man I had known for 20 years. "Do not let anyone leave until I give the signal, and have the local PD waiting at the service entrance. We are going to have a guest leaving in handcuffs." I hit send. Then I opened another file. It was a speech. The traditional father of the bride speech. I highlighted the text and hit delete. The cursor blinked on the blank white page, a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. I didn't need a speech. I needed an indictment. I started typing. I typed out the transcript of what he said in the bathroom. I typed out the transcript of what he said in the car. I typed out the numbers of his debts. I typed out the name of his mistress. I printed the pages. The printer whirred and spat them out one by one, warm and sharp. I folded the papers and put them in the inside pocket of my tuxedo jacket right next to my heart. I turned off the computer. The room plunged back into darkness. I wasn't Clint the CEO anymore. I wasn't Clint the nice old man. I was Clint the trucker who had once driven through a hurricane to deliver medical supplies because people were counting on me. I was the man who held the wheel when the world was trying to blow me off the road. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were red-rimmed and tired, but they were hard, stone hard. "I am coming for you, son," I said to the mirror. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee, black and strong. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun come up. I watched the light hit the trees in the backyard, the trees Sarah used to climb when she was a little girl. I remembered the day she fell out of the oak tree and broke her arm. I remembered how she didn't cry until she saw the look on my face. She was tough. She was a Sullivan. Bradley thought he could break her. He thought he could turn her into a victim. He was about to find out that Sullivans don't break. We might bend. We might bleed. But when we snap back, we take heads off. I checked my watch. 6 a.m. It was time to get dressed. It was time to go to church. It was time to chew some glass. The cathedral was suffocating. It smelled of $50,000 worth of imported white lilies and the stale, recycled air of old money. This wasn't the modest family church where I had buried my wife Diana. This was a venue rented for the cameras, a cavernous hall of marble and stained glass that Bradley had insisted upon because, as he put it, a Sullivan wedding needed to make a statement. I sat in the front pew, my tuxedo feeling like a suit of armor. I looked around at the spectacle my future son-in-law had orchestrated with my money. It was grotesque. There were ice sculptures melting in the vestibule. There was a 12-piece string orchestra playing something that sounded like it belonged at a royal funeral. The guest list had bloated to 300 people, half of whom I didn't know. They were Bradley's associates, slick-haired men in shiny suits, and women who looked at the decor with calculating eyes, estimating the cost per square foot. I saw Richard and Karen Pierce across the aisle. They were preening like peacocks. Karen was wearing a hat so large it blocked the view of 3 people behind her. She caught my eye and gave me a little wave, mouthing the word, magnificent. I didn't wave back. I just stared at the altar where Bradley was waiting. He stood there with Chad, his best man and partner in crime. Bradley looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine ad for men who don't work for a living. His tuxedo was midnight blue, custom-tailored to hide the softness of a man who had never lifted anything heavier than a poker chip. He was rocking back on his heels, scanning the crowd, smiling that winning smile. He wasn't nervous. Why would he be? In his mind, he wasn't standing at an altar. He was standing at the finish line of a long con. He checked his watch, probably calculating how long it would be before he could loosen his tie and start spending my fortune. I checked my inside pocket. The papers were there. The flash drive was in my hand, clenched tight. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral groaned open. The orchestra swelled the music, shifting to the bridal march. The congregation stood up, a rustle of silk and expensive fabric. I turned to look, and my heart broke all over again. Sarah stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the afternoon sun. From a distance, she looked like a fairy tale. But as she began the long walk down the aisle, the reality came into sharp focus. She was a ghost. The dress Bradley had bullied her into was a masterpiece of lace and silk, but it hung on her frame. The weeks of starvation, the liquid diets, the relentless criticism, it had all carved her down. Her collarbones were too sharp. Her face, usually round and full of life, was gaunt, her cheekbones casting hollow shadows under the professional makeup. She wasn't glowing. She was pale, the kind of pallor that comes from exhaustion and fear. She walked slowly, her hand gripping my arm as I met her halfway down the aisle. I felt her trembling. It wasn't the nervous tremble of a bride. It was the weakness of a woman running on empty. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I lied, whispering into her ear. She looked up at me, her eyes huge and watery. "Do I?" "Dad," Brad said, the dress still looked a little tight in the waist this morning. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I patted her hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath the white glove. "He is wrong," I said. "You are perfect." We walked the rest of the way together. Every step felt like a mile. I could feel the eyes of the crowd on us. I could see Karen critiquing the fit of the dress. I could see Richard nodding approvingly at the spectacle. We reached the altar. Bradley stepped forward. He didn't look at Sarah's face. He looked at her waistline, checking to see if his investment in her insecurity had paid off. He seemed satisfied. He reached out and took her hand from mine. His grip was possessive, firm, the hand of a man claiming his property. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the priest asked. His voice boomed through the speakers. I stood there for a second too long. The silence stretched thin and tight as a wire. I looked at Bradley. He was beaming at me, expecting the line, expecting the surrender. "I do," I said, my voice flat. I stepped back and sat down in the front pew. But I didn't get comfortable. I sat on the edge of the wood, my muscles coiled. The ceremony began. The priest droned on about love, honor, and cherishing, words that meant nothing to the man standing 5 feet away from me. I watched Sarah. She was staring at Bradley with a look of desperate devotion, trying so hard to be what he wanted, trying so hard to be worthy of the love he pretended to give. I couldn't let it go on. I couldn't let them exchange vows. If she said, "I do," it would break her when the truth came out. She needed to know before she committed her soul to a monster. The priest paused, taking a breath before the vows. And now, if anyone here has just cause why these two may not be lawfully joined together, let him speak now or forever hold his peace. It is usually a rhetorical question, a formality. The church was silent. A few people shifted in their seats. Bradley smirked, looking out at the crowd, daring anyone to interrupt his coronation. I stood up. The movement was sudden, sharp. The wood of the pew creaked. "Excuse me, Father," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the cathedral it carried to the back row. The priest stopped. He looked over his glasses, confused. Bradley froze. Sarah turned to look at me, her eyes wide with alarm. "Dad," she whispered. I stepped out of the pew and walked up the 3 marble steps to the altar. I didn't look at Sarah. I couldn't. If I looked at her, I might lose my nerve. I looked straight at Bradley. He stared back at me, confused, for a microsecond. But then his arrogance kicked in. He remembered the conversation in my office. He remembered the prenup. He remembered the promise of a succession announcement. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. He nudged Chad with his elbow. He winked. He actually winked at his best man. He thought this was it. He thought the senile old man was confused about the schedule. He thought I was so eager to hand over the company that I couldn't even wait for the reception. He thought I was about to give a speech, handing him the keys to the kingdom right there in the house of God. "It is okay," Father Bradley said, his voice smooth and magnanimous. He turned to the crowd, raising his hands like a politician. "My father-in-law is a man of action. He has some wonderful news he wants to share with everyone. Please, Clint, take the floor." He stepped aside, gesturing to the lectern, where the microphone stood. He was inviting me to my own execution. He was inviting me to sign the death warrant of my legacy. I walked to the lectern. I gripped the sides of the wood. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Richard and Karen looking smug. I saw my employees looking confused. I saw Sarah looking terrified. And then I looked at Bradley Pierce. He was standing with his chest puffed out, the king of the world. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the papers. I pulled out the flash drive. I placed them on the lectern. I tapped the microphone. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a block. "Thump, thump, Bradley," I said, my voice booming through the cathedral. "You are right. I do have some news. But first I want to tell you a story. A story about a man who walked into a bathroom and said something interesting." The smile dropped from Bradley's face like it had been cut with a knife. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a wax figure. He remembered. The bathroom. The hearing aid. The trap snapped shut. And the echo of it filled the room. "You know, folks." I began, my voice steady and warm, leaning into the microphone just enough to create an intimate atmosphere in that cavernous room. "When a father gives away his only daughter, he looks for certain qualities in the man standing at the end of the aisle. He looks for honesty. He looks for integrity. He looks for a man who speaks the truth even when he thinks no one is listening." I looked down at Bradley. He was beaming. He nodded at me, a gracious, humble nod, encouraging the old man to finish his rambling so we could get to the part where I handed over the keys to the kingdom. He thought I was praising him. He thought this was the preamble to the coronation. He squeezed Sarah's hand, performing the role of the devoted lover for the cameras and the crowd. I continued, letting my gaze drift over to Richard and Karen in the front row. They were leaning forward, their faces masks of greedy anticipation. They were ready to inherit the earth. Bradley has always been very clear about what he wants, I said. He is a man with a plan, a man with a vision for the future, and he is a man who knows the value of things. He knows the value of $1. He knows the value of a company, and he certainly knows the value of my daughter. A few guests chuckled politely. Sarah smiled, a weak, hopeful thing that tugged at my chest. She thought I was finally accepting him. She thought I was seeing what she saw. But you know, I said, my tone shifting just a fraction, becoming harder, colder. Sometimes we old truckers have trouble hearing the important things. We get confused. The noise of the road, the years, the diesel engines. It takes a toll. That is why I wear this. I tapped the hearing aid in my right ear. Bradley's smile faltered. Just a little. A flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. He remembered the bathroom. He remembered me shaking the device. He remembered me complaining about the dead battery. You all know I have had some trouble with my hearing lately, I said, looking directly at him. Bradley was very sympathetic about it. He knows that sometimes an old man just needs a little help to understand what is going on around him. But what Bradley didn't know is that this isn't just a hearing aid. It is a state-of-the-art receiver. It connects to my phone, and it records. The silence in the cathedral changed texture. It went from attentive to confused to tense in the span of 3 seconds. Bradley's face went slack. The color began to drain from his cheeks, starting at his jaw and washing up to his hairline, leaving him the color of old parchment. He dropped Sarah's hand. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I held it up so everyone could see it. It was connected to the church's audio system via a Bluetooth dongle I had given the sound engineer 5 minutes before the service started, along with a $100 bill. I think it is important that we all hear Bradley's vows, I said, but not the ones he wrote for today. I want you to hear the vows he made when he thought the world wasn't watching. I want you to hear the vows he made to his best man in the bathroom of the Ritz-Carlton 3 weeks ago. Bradley lunged. It was a desperate, jerky movement. Clint, no, don't, but he was too far away, and he was too slow. I pressed play. The sound of the recording boomed through the high-end speakers of the cathedral. It was crystal clear. The acoustics of the church, designed to carry the word of God to the back pews, now carried the word of a devil to 300 witnesses. I would rather chew glass than touch that cow. The voice was unmistakable. It was Bradley. It was the smooth, arrogant baritone that had charmed my daughter and fooled my board of directors. But now, stripped of its polish, it sounded like pure venom. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a shockwave. Sarah flinched as if she had been slapped. She stepped back, her hands flying to her mouth. I didn't stop the recording. I let it play. But look at her father's bank account. If you can hold your breath for 2 years, you will never have to work a day in your life again. Just think of the inheritance, Brad. The old man looks like he has 1 foot in the grave already. That was Chad. I looked at the best man. He was frozen, staring at his shoes, wishing he could dissolve into the floor. You are a genius, Brad. But seriously, how do you do it? She is so clingy. And let's be honest, she takes up half the bed. Then Bradley's laugh echoed through the holy space. A cold, sharp, mocking sound. I close my eyes and think of the money. I just tell her she is beautiful and she melts. She is so desperate for love she would believe me if I told her the sky was green. Once we are married, I will pay off my gambling debts with the wedding cash, and then I can keep my side piece happy. Sarah never has to know. I paused the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The only sound was the faint hum of the speakers. I looked at Bradley. The transformation was total. The arrogant, swaggering prince was gone. In his place was a terrified, cornered rat. His face was a mask of sheer panic. He was sweating, beads of perspiration popping out on his forehead and running down his nose. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at the crowd, then at his parents, then at me. He couldn't look at Sarah. I looked at Richard and Karen Pierce. They were gripping the pew in front of them, their knuckles white. The smug satisfaction of the dinner party was gone, replaced by a look of absolute horror. Karen's mouth was agape, her expensive makeup suddenly looking garish and clownish. Richard looked like he was having a stroke. They weren't horrified because their son was a monster. They were horrified because the golden goose had just turned around and bitten them. They realized in that split second that the mansion, the status, the retirement plan, it was all evaporating like smoke. I leaned into the microphone again. My voice was low, dangerous, the rumble of a diesel engine idling before the hammer drops. "You thought I was deaf, Bradley," I said. "You thought I was a senile old trucker who could be led to the slaughter. You thought you could mock my daughter, steal my money, and dance on my grave." I stepped out from behind the lectern and walked toward him. He shrank back, stumbling against the altar steps. "But you forgot one thing, son," I said, looming over him. "I drove trucks for 40 years. I can spot a pothole from a mile away, and I can smell a rat from across the state line." I pointed at Sarah. She was standing there, shaking, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup, ruining the perfection he had demanded. But she wasn't looking at him with love anymore. She was looking at him with the dawn of a terrible, painful realization. "She is not a cow," I roared, my voice cracking with the rage I had held back for weeks. "She is a queen. And you are not even fit to wash the mud off her tires." Bradley finally found his voice. It was a high, thin squeak. "Clint, wait. It is not what it sounds like. It was a joke. Just guys talking. You are taking it out of context." "Context?" I asked. "You want context?" I turned back to the lectern. I wasn't done. The audio was just the jab. Now came the cross. I picked up the remote for the projection system. Bradley had set up a massive screen behind the altar for a photo montage of their love story. He had planned to show pictures of them in Cabo, pictures of the engagement pictures that painted a lie. I pointed the remote at the screen. "Let's look at the context." "Bradley," I said. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a montage of romantic photos. It was a scanned image of a legal document. The font was large, clear, and undeniable. It was the prenuptial agreement. Specifically, it was Clause 14C. The text was highlighted in yellow, glowing, like a neon sign in the dim church. The infidelity and conduct provision. I read it aloud, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "If the marriage dissolves due to proven infidelity, fraud, or documented intent to defraud the Sullivan family estate, all financial compensations are null and void." I looked at Bradley. He was shaking his head, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit. "You signed this on Tuesday," I said. "You signed it because you thought you were smarter than me. You signed it because you saw $5 million and you stopped reading." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. This time it wasn't a document. It was a video. It was the footage from the Mercedes, the night before the wedding. The image was grainy black and white infrared, but the faces were clear. Bradley Pierce and Jessica. A gasp went through the crowd, louder than the first one. This wasn't just words. This was visual proof. This was the groom less than 24 hours before the ceremony engaging in acts with another woman that I cannot describe in a church. But I didn't play the whole thing. I didn't need to. I just needed the audio. I needed the confession. I pressed play. Once we are married tomorrow, the clock starts ticking. We strip the assets. We sell the trucks. I am going to make her life such a living hell she will leave me. I will kick her out of her own house. I froze the video on Bradley's face, twisted in that demonic sneer, smoke curling from his lips. I turned to the congregation. "This is the man you came to celebrate," I said. "This is the man who wanted to run my company. This is the man who wanted to love and cherish my daughter." I turned back to Bradley. He had fallen to his knees, not in prayer, but in collapse. His legs had simply given out. He was staring up at the screen at his own face, realizing that there was no lie big enough to cover this. "You violated the contract before the ink was even dry on the marriage license," I said. "You lose Bradley. You lose the $5 million. You lose the company. You lose the house." I looked at Leonard, who was standing by the side door. He nodded. "And there is one more thing," I said. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed a bank transfer receipt. $100,000. From my personal account to Bradley's private account. The memo line read, "Wedding venue deposit." Next to it, I displayed another document. A receipt from an offshore gambling site. $100,000 deposited the same day. "You stole from me," I said. "You took the money I gave you for this wedding and you sent it to a bookie in Costa Rica. That is wire fraud. That is embezzlement. That is grand larceny." Bradley looked up at me, tears of terror mixing with the sweat on his face. "Clint, please. I can pay it back. I just needed time. Don't do this." I looked down at him. I didn't see a son. I didn't see a man. I saw a bug that needed to be squashed. "I am not doing anything, Bradley," I said. "The law is." I nodded to the back of the church. The heavy doors opened again. But this time there was no music. There were no flowers. There were 4 police officers, and they were walking straight down the aisle. The echo of his own voice calling my daughter a cow faded into the vaulted ceiling of the cathedral, but the silence that replaced it was heavier than concrete. Bradley was still on his knees, his tuxedo trousers staining on the marble steps, but his eyes were fixed on the screen behind me. He wasn't looking at the past anymore. He was looking at his future, and it was burning down in high definition. I pressed the button on the remote again. The audio recording file vanished from the screen, replaced by a scanned document that was magnified to the size of a billboard. It was the last page of the prenuptial agreement, the one Bradley had signed with such arrogant haste in my office just days ago. The signature was massive, projected in black ink, a testament to his own greed. I walked over to him, my footsteps slow and deliberate, echoing like the ticking of a clock that had just run out of time. "Do you recognize this, Bradley?" I asked, my voice amplified by the microphone cutting through the stunned atmosphere of the church. "This is the contract you signed. This is the deal you made with the devil because you thought the devil was sleeping." I pointed the remote laser at the screen, highlighting a paragraph I had asked Leonard to bury deep in the addendums. Clause 14. The forfeiture of assets upon proven malice. You read the part about the $5 million. I continued pacing back and forth in front of the altar, like a prosecutor in a courtroom. You saw the golden parachute. You saw the payout. But you didn't read the condition, did you, son? You were so busy counting money you didn't have that you missed the trigger mechanism. I looked out at the crowd. 300 people were frozen in their pews. The socialites, the business partners, the distant relatives. They were all leaning forward, hungry for the carnage. This was better than any wedding reception. This was a public execution. The clause states clearly, I said, reading from the screen, that any documented evidence of conspiracy to defraud the Sullivan estate, or any act of infidelity committed prior to the legalization of the union, renders all financial promises null and void. Bradley looked up at me, his face a mask of sweat and terror. "It was just talk, Clint," he rasped, his voice cracking. "It was just locker room talk. I didn't mean it. You can't hold me to that." just talk, I repeated. I clicked the remote. The screen flickered. The legal document disappeared. In its place, the grainy black and white footage from the Mercedes interior camera appeared. The timestamp was from the previous night. The audio hissed for a second, before Bradley's voice filled the church again, clear and undeniable. We strip the assets. We sell the trucks. We sell the warehouses. The real estate alone is worth $50 million. I will break her down until she is begging for a divorce. A gasp rippled through the congregation. It wasn't just a gasp of shock, it was a gasp of revulsion. They were watching a man calmly plot the psychological and financial destruction of the woman standing 10 feet away from him in a wedding dress. I didn't turn off the video. I let it play. I let them see the way he touched his mistress. I let them hear the laughter as he described how he would kick Sarah out of her own home. I let the image sear into the retinas of every person in that room. Sarah made a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a sob. It was a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a physical blow. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide, staring at the screen, staring at the man she had starved herself for. The illusion didn't just break, it shattered into dust. I stopped the video right at the moment. Bradley laughed about redecorating my house. That is not locker room talk, Bradley, I said, my voice dropping to a growl. That is a confession. That is conspiracy. And that is the sound of $5 million evaporating. I gestured to the side door of the cathedral. It opened and Leonard walked in. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his charcoal litigation suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. He walked down the aisle with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, his heels clicking on the stone floor. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked only at Bradley. Leonard stepped up to the altar and placed the briefcase on the communion table. He opened it and pulled out a stack of documents stapled and flagged with red tags. Mr. Pierce Leonard said, his voice projecting without a microphone, dry and clinical. Per the instructions of my client, Mr. Clint Sullivan, and in accordance with the binding contract you signed 72 hours ago, I am hereby serving you with a notice of breach and immediate forfeiture. Leonard handed the papers to Bradley, who took them with trembling hands, like a man accepting his own death certificate. The $5 million separation payment is rescinded. Leonard continued ticking off the items on his fingers. The offer of executive employment within Sullivan Logistics is rescinded. The transfer of the property at 1400 Highland Drive is revoked immediately, as the deed was held in a charitable trust contingent on your moral standing, which you have demonstrably violated. I heard a scream from the front row. It was Karen Pierce. She had stood up, clutching her pearls, her face a rictus of horror. Not the house, she shrieked. You gave us the keys. It was never your house, Karen, I said, cutting her off. It was a test, and you failed. You measured the drapes before you checked the foundation. Leonard wasn't finished. He pulled another document from the stack. Furthermore, he stated, his eyes boring into Bradley. He was still kneeling on the ground. You are liable for the costs incurred by the Sullivan family under the pretense of this fraudulent union. We are filing a civil suit for the recovery of $150,000 in wedding expenses, including the venue, the catering, and the floral arrangements which you insisted upon. Bradley shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I don't have that kind of money. You know I don't. We know, Leonard said, cold as ice. We have reviewed your financials. We know about the $250,000 in gambling debt. We know about the loans you took out against your parents' retirement fund. Richard Pierce slumped in his pew, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He hadn't known that part. He looked at his son, not with love, but with the realization that his own retirement was gone, burned at a poker table by the boy he had spoiled. Leonard took a step closer to Bradley, looming over him. And finally, there is the matter of the $100,000 deposit Mr. Sullivan gave you for the house. The money you wired to an offshore account in Costa Rica yesterday afternoon. Bradley looked up, his eyes wild. I can fix it. I can win it back. I just need time. You are out of time, Leonard said, closing the briefcase with a snap that sounded like a gunshot. That is embezzlement, Bradley. That is wire fraud. And since the money crossed international lines, it is a federal offense. I stepped forward, taking the microphone one last time. I looked at the man who had called my daughter a cow. He was a puddle on the floor, a weeping, broken thing. He had wanted to strip my company for parts. He had wanted to sell off my trucks and put me in a home. He had wanted to break my daughter's spirit. Now he was the one who was broken. I looked at Sarah. She had lowered her hands. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at Bradley with a cold, detached curiosity, like she was looking at roadkill on the side of the highway. She was seeing him for the first time. The spell was broken. The gaslighting had been burned away by the harsh light of the truth. You wanted to marry a Sullivan, I said to Bradley. You wanted the name. You wanted the money. Well, you got the full experience, son. You got the justice that comes with the name. I looked at his parents, Richard and Karen, who were huddled together in their pew, looking like refugees in designer clothes. And you two, I said, pointing a finger at them. You enabled him. You taught him that he was better than everyone else. You looked down on me because I worked with my hands. You thought you were marrying into a bank account. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $1 bill. I crumpled it up and threw it at them. It landed on Karen's lap. Here, I said. Buy yourself a clue. Because that is the only inheritance you are getting from me. The crowd was silent, terrified, and mesmerized. They had come for a wedding, and they had witnessed an autopsy. I had dissected the Pierce family in front of God and everyone they wanted to impress. I turned to Leonard. Give them the bill, Leo, I said. Leonard handed a final invoice to Richard Pierce. It was the bill for the dinner at Le Bernardin. You can pay that on your way out, Leonard said. I looked back at Bradley. Get up, I said. He didn't move. He couldn't move. I said, get up, I roared, my voice shaking the stained glass windows. He scrambled to his feet, swaying unsteadily. He looked at me, then at Sarah, then at the door. He was looking for an escape route, but there wasn't one, because the doors at the back of the church were opening again. And this time it wasn't the caterers, it wasn't the florist, it was the consequences. The heavy thud of police boots on the marble floor was the only sound in the cathedral. It was a rhythm I knew well from years of watching enforcement officers walk onto loading docks to shut down illegal operations. It was the sound of authority. It was the sound of the end. Bradley was still on his knees. He looked over his shoulder at the approaching officers. His face, which had been a mask of terror, now crumbled into something pathetic. He scrambled to get up his expensive shoes, slipping on the polished stone. He looked like a deer on ice, frantic and clumsy. Clint, you can stop this, he pleaded, his voice high and shrill. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them it was a loan. I will pay you back. I swear. I didn't answer him. I just crossed my arms and watched. The lead officer, a detective named Miller, who I had worked with on cargo theft cases years ago, stepped up to the altar. He didn't look at the flowers. He didn't look at the cross. He looked at the man in the tuxedo, who was shaking like a leaf. Bradley Pierce, Detective Miller, said, his voice bored and professional. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Bradley tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. He bumped into the communion table, knocking over a vase of white lilies. The water splashed over his shoes. This is ridiculous, Bradley shouted, trying to regain some shred of dignity. My father-in-law gave me that money. It was a gift. You cannot arrest me for spending a gift. It was not a gift, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. It was a deposit for a venue. A venue that never received a dime because you sent the money to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, controlled by an illegal sports book. That is theft, Bradley. And since you used a wire transfer to move the money internationally, the feds are going to want to have a chat with you too. The officer grabbed Bradley's wrist. The click of the handcuffs was loud, sharp, and final. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling a metallic applause for the end of the show. "Get your hands off me," Bradley screamed, struggling as they pulled his arms behind his back. "Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Sullivan Logistics." "You are unemployed," I corrected him. "And you are broke." They hauled him to his feet. He looked wild, his hair disheveled, his bow tie askew. He looked at the crowd, searching for an ally, searching for anyone who still believed the con. But the faces staring back at him were cold. The spell was broken. They saw him for what he was, a thief in a rented suit. Then he looked at Sarah. She hadn't moved. She stood near the lectern, her hands at her sides. She was staring at him with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. It wasn't fear. It wasn't love. It was clarity. The fog of gaslighting had lifted, burned away by the heat of the truth I had just dropped on the congregation. Sarah Baby Bradley pleaded, switching tactics instantly. Tell them we are in love. Tell them your father is crazy. He is trying to control you. He is jealous of us. Don't let them take me." He was trying to use the old buttons. He was trying to trigger her insecurity, her need to please him. I held my breath. This was the moment. I had given her the gun, but she had to pull the trigger. If she collapsed now, if she ran to him, everything I had done would be for nothing. Sarah took a step forward. Her dress rustled softly. She walked toward him until she was standing right in front of him. The police officers paused, giving her a moment. Bradley smiled, a weak, desperate twitch of his lips. "That is it, baby. Tell them." Sarah looked him up and down. She looked at his sweating face, his handcuffed wrists, his panic-stricken eyes. "You called me a cow," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. Bradley blinked. "Sarah, that was just... You said you would rather chew glass than touch me," she continued, her voice rising, gaining strength with every syllable. "You said I was desperate. You said I took up half the bed. Baby, please." She reached out. I thought she was going to touch his cheek. I thought she was going to offer him comfort. Instead, she drew her hand back and slapped him. It wasn't a movie slap. It wasn't a theatrical gesture. It was a full-body swing, putting every ounce of her pain, her hunger, her humiliation into her palm. The sound was like a whip crack. It was louder than the organ. It was louder than the gasp of the crowd. Bradley's head snapped to the side. A bright red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek. He stumbled back, held up only by the grip of the officers. Sarah stood there, her chest heaving. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She looked like a statue of vengeance carved out of white silk. "I am not desperate," she said, her voice ringing through the church. "And I am certainly not a cow. But you are a pig. And I would rather die alone than spend one more second letting you make me feel small." She turned to the officers. "Get him out of my sight," she said. The officers nodded. They dragged Bradley down the aisle. He was shouting now, cursing me, cursing Sarah, cursing the world. But no one was listening. He was just noise. He was yesterday's garbage being taken out to the curb. I watched him go. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. My daughter was back. The fire was back in her eyes. But we weren't done yet. I turned my attention to the front pew. Richard and Karen Pierce were still sitting there, frozen in shock. They looked like two mannequins in a store window that had just been smashed with a brick. Karen was clutching her purse to her chest, as if she thought I was going to steal it. Richard was staring at the empty space where his son had been standing, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. I signaled to the side of the room. My head of security, a man named Mike, who used to be a linebacker and was now the most loyal employee, I had stepped forward. He had two other guards with him. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing black tactical gear. "Mr. Sullivan," Mike asked. "Remove the trash, Mike," I said, pointing at the Pierce parents. Richard stood up, his face turning a blotchy purple. "Now see here, Clint. You cannot treat us like this. We are guests. We had nothing to do with Bradley's financial confusion." "Financial confusion." I laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. "You knew. You ate my food, drank my wine, and laughed at my daughter while your son plotted to rob me blind. You are accomplices, and you are trespassing." Karen stood up, trying to muster some of her old haughtiness. "I have never been so insulted in my life. We are leaving. You people are barbaric." "You are not leaving," I said. "You are being thrown out." Mike and his team moved in. They didn't use handcuffs, but they didn't use kid gloves either. Mike grabbed Richard by the arm, his grip tight enough to wrinkle the polyester suit. Another guard took Karen's elbow. "Do not touch me!" Karen shrieked, swatting at the guard. "This is assault. I will sue you. I will sue all of you." "You can try," I said. "But Leonard is going to be very busy freezing your assets to pay back the loans Bradley took out in your names." "Did you know about those?" Karen stopped struggling. Her eyes went wide. "Loans? He forged your signatures on a second mortgage," I said, delivering the final blow. "He bet the house on this wedding. And he lost. You are broke, Karen. You are homeless." The scream she let out was primal. It was the sound of a woman watching her social standing evaporate. She lunged at me, her nails bared, but the guard held her back easily. "Get them out," I said, turning my back on them. I heard the scuffle as they were dragged up the aisle. I heard Karen's shrieks fading as the heavy doors opened and closed. I heard the murmurs of the crowd, the shock turning into a buzz of excitement. I walked over to Sarah. She was still standing at the altar, looking at her hand, the hand that had delivered the slap. She was rubbing her palm. I put my arm around her shoulders. She didn't flinch. She leaned into me, solid and heavy. She wasn't a fragile bird anymore. She was a Sullivan. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. She looked up at me. Her makeup was ruined. Her hair was coming loose and her dress was too big for her. But she looked more beautiful than she ever had when she was trying to be perfect for him. "He never loved me, did he?" she asked. "No, sweetheart," I said honestly. "He didn't know how. You can't love a queen when you are busy trying to steal her crown." She nodded slowly. She took a deep breath and let it out. "I am hungry," she said. I smiled. It was the best thing I had heard in months. "I bet you are," I said. She turned to face the congregation. 300 people were staring at us, waiting to see what happened next. The show was over, but no one wanted to leave. Sarah grabbed the microphone. Her hand was steady. "There isn't going to be a wedding," she said, her voice booming. "Obviously. But my dad paid for a lot of food, and a really expensive cake." She looked at me, a mischievous glint in her eye that reminded me of her mother. "And I plan on eating a very large piece of it." She paused, then added, "And if anyone here was friends with Bradley, you can leave now. The rest of you, let's party." A cheer went up from the Sullivan side of the aisle. It started low and built into a roar. My drivers, my warehouse managers, my friends, they stood up and clapped. They loved a fighter. Sarah took my arm. "Walk me out, Dad," she asked. "Anywhere you want to go," I said. We walked back down the aisle together. We walked over the petals Bradley had scattered. We walked past the empty pew where his parents had sat. We walked out into the sunlight. The police cruiser was just pulling away with Bradley in the back seat. He looked out the window and saw us. He saw Sarah laughing. He saw me smiling. He screamed something, but the glass was thick, and we couldn't hear him. I waved. "Just once." Goodbye, son, I whispered. We walked toward the reception hall. Sarah stopped and kicked off her high heels. She walked barefoot on the grass. You know, Dad, she said, you were right about one thing. What is that? I asked. I would rather be alone than be with someone who makes me feel lonely. I squeezed her shoulder. You are never alone, Sarah. You have me, and you have yourself, and that is a hell of a team. We went inside. We ate the cake. We drank the champagne. And for the first time in a long time, the Sullivan family was safe. The parasite was gone. The host had survived, and the predator who had posed as a senile old trucker was finally ready to rest, or at least ready for a slice of cake. The reception hall was a monument to Bradley's ego, a cavernous ballroom draped in silk and crystals that had cost more than my first fleet of trucks. But as we walked in, the atmosphere was different. The air wasn't stiff with pretension anymore. It was electric with the buzzing energy of a close call. The people who had come to network, the friends of Bradley, who were looking for a payout, had vanished like smoke in a strong wind. They had scurried away the moment the handcuffs clicked shut, terrified of being associated with a felon. What remained was the Sullivan crew. My warehouse managers, my dispatchers, the drivers who had been with me since the days of paper logs and payphones. These were people who knew the value of loyalty, and they weren't going anywhere. They had watched me take down a hijacker, and now they wanted to celebrate the recovery of the cargo. I walked to the center of the room where the band was awkwardly holding their instruments, unsure of what to play for a wedding without a groom. I waved at the band leader. Play something loud, I said. Play something with a beat. We are not mourning a marriage. We are celebrating a liberation. The band leader grinned and kicked off a classic rock anthem. The tension in the room snapped. Ties were loosened. Jackets were thrown over chairs. The open bar, which Bradley had restricted to top-shelf liquor for the VIPs, was suddenly open to everyone. I watched a forklift driver pour himself a glass of Dom Perignon and toast the empty space where the groom should have been. I found Sarah at the head table. She was sitting in the throne-like chair that was meant for the bride. She had kicked off her shoes and was curled up, her legs tucked under her expensive dress. In front of her was the wedding cake, a 6-tier monstrosity of vanilla and raspberry. She hadn't waited for a knife. She was eating a piece with a fork she had grabbed from a place setting, and she was eating it with a ferocity that made me smile. She wasn't dainty. She wasn't watching her figure. She was devouring her freedom one bite at a time. I sat down in the chair next to her, the one reserved for the groom. I picked up a fork and took a bite of the cake. It was sweet, rich, and absolutely delicious. Not bad for stolen money, I said. Sarah laughed. It was a wet, choked sound, but it was real. It tastes like calories, Dad. Thousands of wonderful, forbidden calories. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the party swirl around us. I looked at her profile. The hollows in her cheeks were still there, the physical evidence of Bradley's torture, but her eyes were clear. The fog was gone. I am sorry, Sarah, I said, my voice low so only she could hear. She stopped eating and looked at me. For what? For saving me, for letting it go that far, I said. I looked at my hands, the hands that had steered us through this storm. I could have stopped it sooner. I could have kicked him out the night he made that comment about the liposuction. I could have forbidden the surgery. I could have handed you a check and told you to leave him. But I didn't. I watched you starve. I watched you cry. I watched you shrink. I felt a lump form in my throat. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do, Sarah. Watching you hurt was harder than burying your mother. But I knew that if I stepped in, if I played the controlling father, you would have run into his arms. He had his claws in you so deep. You had to see the blood to know you were cut. Sarah put down her fork. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip was strong. You were right, she said. If you had told me, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought you were just being the overprotective dad. I would have married him to prove you wrong." She looked out at the dance floor, where Leonard was currently trying to teach my head of HR how to salsa. "I needed to feel the cold," she whispered. "I needed to feel how cold he really was. When we were on the altar and you played that tape, it didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like confirmation. Like a voice in my head finally started screaming what I had been whispering to myself for months." She squeezed my hand. "You didn't break me, Dad. You broke the spell. You let me walk through the fire so I could burn off the weak parts." I looked at my daughter. She wasn't the girl I had raised. She was a woman who had survived a predator. She was tougher now. There was steel in her spine that hadn't been there before. Bradley had wanted a cow. He had wanted a victim. Instead, he had forged a warrior. "So what happens now?" she asked, looking around the lavish room. "We have a lot of leftover food and a house I do not want to live in." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the first true wave of relaxation hit me in months. "The house is already taken care of," I said. "The charitable trust will liquidate it and put the money into the driver pension fund. As for the food," I stood up and tapped my glass with a spoon. The music died down. The room turned to look at me. "Listen up, everyone," I shouted, my voice booming without the microphone. "We have enough food here to feed an army, and I know a lot of folks who are hungry. Mike, load up the vans. We are taking the rest of this to the homeless shelter downtown. But first," I raised my glass of champagne, "I want to propose a toast, not to a wedding, but to a dodged bullet." The room roared with laughter and cheers. Glasses were raised high. "To Sarah," I said, looking down at my daughter. "The toughest Sullivan of them all." Sarah stood up. She raised her fork with a piece of cake still on it. "To Chewing Glass," she said with a grin, and spitting it out. We drank. The champagne bubbled in my throat, effervescent and light. It was the taste of victory. It was the taste of a clean getaway. I sat back down next to my daughter. We watched our friends and employees pack up the lobster and the filet mignon. We watched the dismantling of the Pierce fantasy. "You know, Dad," Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I think I am going to need a job on Monday, since my career as a trophy wife didn't work out." I wrapped my arm around her. "I think there is an opening in the executive wing," I said. "I am looking for someone to run the logistics division. Someone who knows how to spot a fake manifest. Someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty." She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "I think I know just the woman," she said. We sat there as the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the floor. The nightmare was over. The leech had been salted and burned. My daughter was safe. My company was safe. And as I took another bite of the $3,000 cake, I thought to myself that for a man who had spent his life on the road, this was the best destination I had ever reached. 6 months is not a long time in the grand scheme of things, just a blink of an eye when you measure life by the mile markers on the interstate, but it is long enough for a seed to grow, and it is certainly long enough for a weed to wither. I sat on the front porch of my house, the same porch where I used to watch Sarah wait for the school bus 30 years ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of diesel smoke, orange and bruised purple. In my hand was a report Leonard had dropped off earlier that afternoon. It was the final post-mortem on the Pierce family. Bradley was currently a resident of a federal correctional facility in upstate New York. It turned out the wire fraud charges stuck hard. He was serving a 5-year sentence. Leonard told me that Bradley had been assigned to the kitchen detail. The irony was rich enough to fatten a hog. The man who refused to get his hands dirty, who thought he was too good for honest labor, was now scrubbing grease traps for 12 cents an hour. He had sent me a letter a month ago. It was a pathetic scrawl begging for a character reference for a sentence reduction hearing. I had burned it in the fireplace without opening it. His parents, Richard and Karen, hadn't fared much better. The civil suits and the foreclosure on their own home had left them stripped clean. They had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy last week. The last I heard, Richard was working at a car rental counter at the airport, handing keys to people who were going places he could no longer afford to visit. Karen was living in a one-bedroom apartment in the bad part of town, probably telling anyone who would listen that she was a victim of a cruel conspiracy. They were ghosts to me now, just cautionary tales about what happens when you try to hijack a truck without checking who is behind the wheel. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. A black SUV pulled into the driveway. The door opened and Sarah stepped out. She didn't look like the ghost who had walked down the aisle 6 months ago. She looked like a force of nature. She was wearing a tailored pantsuit that screamed authority, and her hair was cut in a sharp, professional bob. She had gained back the weight Bradley had shamed her into losing, and she carried it with the grace of a woman who knows exactly who she is. She walked up the steps carrying a stack of files. She was the new vice president of operations for Sullivan Logistics, and she ran the floor with a terrifying efficiency that made the union reps sweat. "Hey, Dad," she said, dropping the files on the patio table. "I just got off the phone with the distributors in Chicago. They tried to hike the rates on the refrigerated units." I took a sip of my iced tea. "And what did you tell them?" She grinned, and it was a smile full of teeth. "I told them they could honor the contract, or I would have our fleet parked on their loading dock, blocking their shipments until Christmas." They folded in 5 minutes. I laughed, a deep belly sound that felt good in my chest. "That is my girl." She sat down next to me, stealing a sip of my tea. She looked tired, but it was the good kind of tired. The tired that comes from building something, not from being torn down. "Are you happy, Sarah?" I asked quietly. She looked out at the yard at the oak tree she used to climb. "I am busy," she said. "I am productive. And for the first time in my life, I am not waiting for someone else to tell me I am good enough. So yes, Dad, I think I am happy." She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her files, and went inside to finish her work. I watched her go. She didn't need me to protect her anymore. She had armor of her own now. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a small framed photograph. It was old, the edges worn from years of being carried in a wallet. It was a picture of Diana, my wife, taken the day we bought our first truck. She was laughing, her hair blowing in the wind, her hand resting on the hood of the cab. I looked at her face, illuminated by the dying light of the day. "We did good, Diana," I whispered to the photo. "It got a little messy there for a minute. The road got rough. We hit some black ice, but I kept it between the ditches." I imagined her voice the way she used to sound when I came home after a long haul, telling me to wash up for dinner. She would have been proud of Sarah today. She would have been proud of the slap in the church. I put the photo back in my pocket right over my heart. The house was quiet. The company was secure. The parasite had been removed, and the host had survived stronger than before. I finished my tea. The ice cubes clinked against the glass, a lonely but solid sound. I wasn't Clint the CEO or Clint the victim. I was just a man sitting on his porch watching the sun go down over a kingdom that was finally safe. I leaned back in the rocking chair and closed my eyes, listening to the distant hum of the highway miles away. The wheels were turning. The freight was moving. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally turn off the engine and rest. Ride over. Whatever you do, never mistake silence for weakness. I learned that real power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about waiting for the right moment to speak the truth. My daughter learned that her value isn't determined by a man's approval or a dress size, but by her own character and strength. We cleared out the rot from our lives, and in doing so, we made room for something real. Family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and having each other's backs when the road gets rough. Sometimes you have to let the tower crumble so you can rebuild it on solid ground. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more life stories. Have you ever had to save a loved one from a toxic relationship? Let me know your story in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay strong.